Well, thank you everybody for joining another episode of Simply Finance with Shane White. I'm excited today to have Denise Woodard from Partake Foods on the podcast. Denise, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Do you want to give everyone a little intro about yourself and just how you got to Partake Foods?
Sure thing. So, I'm Denise, the founder and CEO of Partake Foods. We're a line of allergy friendly snacks. They were inspired by my 5-year-old daughter Vivian's experience with food allergies. I was really frustrated with the options I was finding from a taste perspective and a nutritional perspective. And kind of for lack of better words, like a brand coolness factor perspective. And so
Yeah.
when I couldn't find solutions that met my family's needs, I left my career at Coca-Cola and started Partake in 2017.
Wow. That's such a, I did, did a little research and it was curious to your background because I'm in the food industry too, obviously. And it seemed like you had quite a background at Coca-Cola. Was it a difficult transition to that's one question I ask on here a lot is like, how did you had like a passion for wanting to create this brand. How did you kind of go 0 to 1 and just decide like, hey, I'm going to leave my, really, really good job, right, at Coca-Cola, and looked like you had a long career at Coca-Cola. Yeah, how did you kind of think through that process and finally decide to take the leap?
Sure. So I think my journey with Coca-Cola was pretty serendipitous. So I spent the first like 6 years or so working on the larger trademark brands like Coke, Diet Coke, and Sprite. And then I had the opportunity to move over to venturing and emerging brands where the brands that Coke had either acquired or invested in sat. And so I had the chance to work with entrepreneurs like Seth Goldman from Honest Tea. And what I learned was that I don't want to say a regular person, but like a regular person with enough
Sure.
hard work
Yeah.
and dedication and passion could create a really meaningful brand. So I think that gave me the confidence that I otherwise wouldn't have had. And then, as luck would also have it, I ended up entering a small business pitch competition shortly
Oh.
after having the idea. And we won with just an idea, which
Oh,
was
wow.
fantastic.
Awesome.
But it came with some local press, which required me to tell my boss what I was doing very early on. And so the kind of verdict that we came to was I could moonlight as long as I didn't have a product that I was selling. And when I actually had a product, I had to leave. And so it gave
Oh.
me the kick in the butt that I needed to leave because otherwise I probably would have tried to turn this into a side hustle and we wouldn't be where we are today.
Right. And that's a good leeway to my next question. Do you feel like was that kind of key in you guys kind of taking off, was just like having a full focus on it? Like, to your point, do you think it would have taken a lot longer to get where you are if you would have just done it as a side hustle?
100%. So I think also because we launched as a self-funded and self-distributed brand. And so literally it was me filling up the back of my SUV with cookies and going to natural food stores across the city every single day. And like if I had another job, I just
Sure,
wouldn't have
yeah.
been able to do it. And so I do think it was really necessary for us.
That's wild. Do you remember the conversation like with your husband or with other family when you decided like, hey, I'm going to go forward with this? I love that too. Do you remember like the actual conversation where you decided to make the decision?
My husband and I were actually in line at the zoo.
Oh,
And I remember talking about it, and the person in line in front of us turned around and was like, sounds like you have a really great idea. You should enter the small business pitch
oh, no
competition.
way.
And it was a Saturday afternoon, and the applications closed like that Monday at midnight. And so I had to incorporate the business and like figure out at least a working name for it. And so I think my husband's definitely been supportive from day one, which is so important because entrepreneurship is just like a 24/7 all-encompassing thing, and so without the support of your entire family, I think it's really hard to do. So he was really supportive. I will say my parents not so much. So they're like the biggest cheerleaders now, but neither one of them graduated college. So the thing that was so important for them was like go to school, get a formal education, get a secure job in corporate America. And then when I called them, I was like, I'm going to leave my job at Coke and start selling cookies. They just thought I'd lost my mind.
No, I bet. I mean, I think that's something on here that I've learned from talking to quite a few founders now, is just like kind of taking that leap and just believing in yourself seems to be like a very consistent thing that I've heard a lot of people say. Um, what was it like creating the like first couple versions of the product? So you were saying that like when you were at Coke, until you had a physical product, you were allowed to like keep working and doing both. Do you remember like version 1 of the first cookie?
I do. So the other part of the story that I didn't mention is our nanny Martha actually has a small piece of equity in the company because
Oh,
a
cool.
lot of this was her idea. So I started to tell her all of my woes about like the products in this aisle don't taste good and I don't like how they like Vivi doesn't like them and they're not cool. And she was like, you should start a food company. And so Martha's an amazing cook. And so we were like, oh, maybe she and I can just go to Whole Foods and then get into the kitchen. We actually failed horribly at that. And
Okay.
so thankfully, we were able to find a product developer who brought our vision to life. I
Oh,
think,
cool.
we initially were just rice flour and xanthan gum and sugar and all the things that I found wrong with the gluten-free and vegan and top 8 allergen-free market is what we were having to use. And I just couldn't get it right myself, honestly. And so we had to bring in a real professional to get the job done.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, if it maybe if it was that easy, it would have been done before, right? So, yeah, that makes sense as well. Um, would you have like any do you I guess you said like the first version didn't work very well, you got some professional help. Do you remember the different stages before you decided like with the final product that you wanted to initially bring to market? Like, can you kind of walk the listeners through just like how you guys went through that process and especially sound getting some professional help? I'm curious how that process worked and like what you learned from doing all that.
Sure. So, getting the professional help, initially, I reached out to agencies because I really didn't know where to start.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
then I started getting quotes back, and I was like, this is more money than I have to my name. So, that's not going to work. And then I went on LinkedIn and I looked at some of the competitors in the space, and I just started cold emailing or sending
Oh,
LinkedIn messages to every person who'd had like some sort of product development related job at a company that I either admired or wanted to create somewhat of a product similar to.
okay.
And the person that we ended up working with was somebody who responded to one of those emails and we just hit it off immediately.
Oh,
And
that's
then in
awesome.
terms of the iteration, it was really like, I think, we never would make anything that my daughter couldn't eat safely. And so a lot of it was her being our cheap taste tester. And we didn't really have money for focus groups. So another thing we did was I created a survey monkey for 10 of my mom friends, and then I asked each of them to send it on to 10 more moms. And so
Mhm.
that was kind of our initial sampling pod to determine what flavors and what textures and what was a hit and what wasn't a hit.
Oh, that's a good idea. So you basically got 100 people to fill that out. That's a
Mhm.
good is that would you say that's like enough to move forward to like your first product?
So some of the moms were really gung ho. We actually ended up with about 300
Oh,
responses.
wow.
And
That's
so for
awesome.
us, it felt like enough. And, at some point, I kind of stopped reading the responses because it was like everyone had very small tweaks. And so if I just waited to get something that every single of the 300 people agreed to, we probably still wouldn't have gotten started. So I think at some
Right.
point you have to say, like, this meets the standards that I'm looking for. I think this suits the need. Let's move forward. And, as we continue to have consumer conversations, we can make tweaks, but we have to move forward with something to get started.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And then how did you decide? I feel like this is one that it bounces around a lot of people's mind when you think about launching something. How did you guys decide? Did you launch with one product initially, or did you launch with a few? Or how did you decide like how many SKUs and like how many to launch with?
So we launched with cookies and we launched with 3 SKUs. And I will say there wasn't a ton of science involved. I just walked a ton of grocery stores and I was seeing like, okay, well, it looks like most brands are getting 2 to 4 like slots on shelf. And so I need to come with more than one, but I don't really have the money to develop five. And they're probably
Sure.
not going to put all five on shelf. And so it was just kind of like some rough, like stalking the category to get a feel for what would work.
Got it. Okay. And then once you had a product, what was your like how did you decide where you wanted to launch at first? And that was one thing like I definitely have found where you guys are. First of all, love your guys' website too, by the way. Your website's
Thank you.
phenomenal. I'm an e-commerce person and I've worked in e-com for a while, so I always appreciate a good website. Did you guys launch online first or did you go to grocery first or what was your like distribution plan of like where you wanted to go from like a store and online approach?
Sure. So originally I was thinking, well, we'll make this a D2C brand initially. And what I learned was that the food allergy consumer has a really high barrier to entry and often wants to see the product and touch the product. And so maybe e-com could be a great supplement, but that we needed to have some sort of in-store presence was what I thought. And so I was very leery because I'd heard so many horror stories about working with distributors and all the chargebacks and
Right.
deductions and things. And I was like, well, we don't have money for that. And so once again, kind of just like stalking online, and was able to look at some of our competitors and where they were placed. And we live in Jersey City, right across the river from
Okay.
Manhattan. And so I was able to compile a list of like 50 natural food stores in Brooklyn and New York and New Jersey. And so we just like hit the ground running on those stores.
Got it. That's awesome. And then do you have an idea of future state where is there like a plan that you guys are going after? I know are you guys in Target? Is that the one I was able to find recently?
Yeah. So
That's
we're
phenomenal.
in,
Congratulations.
thank you. Yeah. We'll finish this year in over 3,500 stores, and we were in about 350 last year.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's a huge year for you guys. Especially
It's
in a
been
year
a
where a lot
busy
of people
one.
have been going the other way.
It's been a really bittersweet year because there's, so much
Yeah.
bad stuff going on, but internally, like our business has just been on fire this year. So I'm so grateful.
That's awesome. Are you guys then are you going to try to attack, other mass and other national accounts from there if you've already proven it out in Target?
Yeah, so we have a couple of big announcements coming up, one launching in Q4 and one launching in Q1. So I think we'll be up from a door count perspective significantly next year. But it's really important to me that we get the velocity to a strong place, and we get the brand awareness, and we continue to have opportunities for customers to sample our product and get to know our brand. And so I think we'll pump the brakes a little bit just to make sure that we're not getting too crazy and going
Yeah.
too fast. But I do, I feel like we have some wind in our sails, so I want to take advantage of that as well.
Well, congratulations. That's extremely exciting. That's something really hard to
Thank you.
do. I can imagine cracking the code to getting into Target. That was not an easy feat.
That started, I dragged my husband along with me to Expo West in 2017, where we had some Ziploc bag samples and we hadn't even officially launched yet. And I was like, if you see anyone from Target or Whole Foods, no matter where they are, stop them. And he found the head of supplier diversity for Target in a bathroom line. I was thinking, like, I did
Whoa, that's
not mean
awesome.
that. But that's where our relationship with Target started. And they've just been phenomenal partners for us.
Oh, that's so exciting. Congratulations. That's phenomenal. I didn't know that you were in that many in that many indoors. So that's incredible.
Thank you.
Um I mean, yeah. So just to, backtrack a little bit, I mean, you guys you've grown very quickly, right? In regards to like, I would say the general, food brand. I feel like you guys your year over year growth has been incredible. You mentioned at the beginning, how you guys bootstrapped and kind of self-funded to get started. Do you have a perspective, to anyone listening who wants to start a company or start a business, especially in food or beverage? Just kind of like your thoughts or philosophies, and now that you've even been through the process on, you know, starting with bootstrapping, and then what your thoughts are longer term on trying to keep bootstrapping or raising money. And we can kind of go into that because that's a very, deep question with lots of different angles we can go at. But just curious overall on your perspective.
Yeah, I don't think I would change my fundraising journey at all. Being a woman and a person of color, excuse me, I knew that the fundraising journey would be difficult for me and being a first time founder. So it was really important for me that we built a stable business that could survive without outside funding, because I didn't know when it would come or how it would come.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I kind of, even though we have momentum now, I still have that scrappy mentality. Like, I don't think you should, like, personally, I don't want to raise any more capital than what we need to sustainably grow the business.
Got it. Okay. Okay. So kind of the mentality of, not over raising money and really raising money for specific purposes. Is that kind of what you're
Ex-
saying?
That sums it up
Yeah.
perfectly.
Okay. Perfect. And then, one question I've gotten a lot on here, because we've had a few founders who've gone through the fundraising process is, how did you like start that? Like how, like, if you're someone who starts a cookie business and you want to start raising money, like where do you start? Do you start on LinkedIn, or do you have some contacts who knew people? Like, I think just walking through some of that, how you've gotten started is really interesting.
Sure. So we launched in August of 2017, and then we got into a region of Whole Foods and we got into Wegmans in the summer of 2018, at which point we started to try to raise some outside capital and raised a few $100,000 in friends and family capital.
Okay.
As I mentioned, like, neither one of my parents went to college. I don't have a lot of like accredited investors in my family.
Yeah. Okay.
And so it was very much like cobbling together $5,000 and $10,000 checks from like my old colleagues, my husband's old colleagues, a friend of a friend. And so really getting comfortable with telling the story to kind of anyone who would listen. And so that initial kind of several $100,000 that got us through for the next year or so was just like friends of friends and friends who told their great aunt who thought this was a great story. And
Oh, that's
so
cool.
it was just really like cobbling it together. And then when we raised our seed round of funding, I have this spreadsheet with like 110 potential investors, and we got no's from about 86 of them. And I kind of started in the way that you mentioned. So whether it was like LinkedIn or like looking at other companies and who was funding them, or like all the various angel groups, whether they were tied to my alumni network or like where I live. But we ended up taking our lead investor is Marcy Venture Partners, which is Jay-Z's venture fund. And
Yeah.
so
Oh,
I
yeah.
couldn't have
Definitely know
asked
that
for a
one.
better investor. But there were a lot of no's along the way.
That's so cool. How did you end up getting a hold of them?
A friend of a friend knew one of the partners there, and once I had a chance to tell them the story and they had a chance to try the product, it was a long process though. I think we met them in early 2018, and we closed the seed round in the summer of 2019. And so when I think of investors, I do think of it as a bit of a marriage, because you're really holding
Sure.
hands and growing the business together. And so yeah, no, they've been phenomenal partners, and it was just a random introduction from a friend of a friend.
It's funny how some of that happens, right? It's like just the right place, the right time, that whole thing.
Definitely.
Do you have a perspective just for anyone, if they're thinking about raising money or want to go down that path, just like lessons learned, or like do's and don'ts, or anything major as far as like maybe things to avoid?
Sure. I think do's and don'ts, like, don't, and I've been so guilty of this. I learned this the hard way. Like, waste your time on some investors. Like, sometimes people just want to put you through the ringer and ask a bazillion questions, and they have no intention of investing in your business. And like, you need the money so bad and you want it to work so bad that you like let this person like like treat you in a way that's not nice, or like just like answer a bunch of questions that are really taking you away from running your business. And like I would say, try not to subject yourself to that, because as I mentioned, like having an investor is kind of like having a marriage. And so if it's someone you don't want to even like go through the diligence and like initial process with, it's probably not someone you're going to want to be married to. So try to
Right.
pick,
Okay.
try to be selective. But I know it's hard, because I know how hard it was for us to raise money. So I think also just being, trying to talk to as many people as you can, because you never know where the right introduction is going to come from. And then also like kind of taking it easy on yourself. I find that fundraising is like really hard. I think I use the term soul crushing a lot, because
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
it comes with a lot of no's, and it's like you're expected to kind of continue to like keep these amazing metrics for your business, so people want to invest in the business, but then you're also like working in the business every day and also
Sure.
raising
Yeah.
money full time. And so it's a lot. And so I would say, just like allow your like realize that it's a lot, and like don't be too hard on yourself.
Sure. And I mean, I'm assuming when you're in that process, it must become a huge part of your day and week, right? Yeah.
Definitely. So I feel like it can be a full-time job, and when you're a team of one or two, like one person being out doing that all day is hard, but it's necessary, because a lot of times you need the capital to grow.
Right. Exactly. Do you know, I mean, I don't know if you've looked into any more funding this year. Do you know if that process has changed much now that it's, we're in this COVID world, everyone's on Zoom and that's all going on? Do you know if like, has it been, I don't know. It's funny because the reason I asked that is I've wanted to start a podcast like this for a long time. And when I started this in March, I think honestly, I always think back, it was a little bit of timing luck, where it's been easier to get people on Zoom over the last 7 months than I think it would have been, 3 to 6 months before that. Cause now it's like another Zoom call in your day, and we're, having this fun conversation. I'm curious if it's like that with investing and raising capital now.
So we did do, at kind of the start of COVID, we did an extension of our seed round with our existing investors, because
Ah,
who knew what the world was going to be like. And I just wanted to make sure we'd really shored up our balance sheet. And
sure.
so otherwise, I think so that was, I don't want to say easy, but like we were working with the internal team that we've been working with. And then,
Right.
as we continue to have discussions, I think it's really important to always be having the discussions, even if you're not raising money, in the event like things need to accelerate, or in the event that things go all virtual, or just to always be prepared for any case scenario. And so to start cultivating those relationships even when you're not raising money, I think is really important.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Has um has it been like an interesting process with COVID? Like for you guys, it sounds like you've kind of been on a roller coaster up and up this year. But has that been something of a struggle as far as raising money? Like I'm curious if investors right now, or anyone who's giving out capital, I'm sure this year has been an interesting and dicey year for trying to gain capital.
I think it depends on what the business is doing. And so thankfully, we're having a year that exceeded our plan, even without thinking about COVID. And so thankfully, things are going well for us right now. But I really think it's about kind of the business metrics internally. But, a lot of these funds have capital that they have to deploy or need to deploy.
Right.
And so, I think some people are definitely still writing checks. I think, angel investors who are maybe writing checks from their own personal funds, depending on how the market's performing and the election and the coronavirus and all the
Right.
things, like maybe a little bit more leery to write checks. But I think from a fund perspective, like the ones that I've chatted with are definitely still very much actively investing right now.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. The other question I had, just because this is one we haven't really dove into on this podcast very much, is I worked at our X Bar before we got acquired, and now we're acquired, and so there's different things that I'm now used to and have to report. When you're running a company that is backed by venture or angel capital, can you just give the listeners an idea of like how much in the day to day, week to week, and I'm sure it's different with every investor, but like how much do you guys have to like report and share as like a private company who has investors? Like how does that whole component work?
Sure. So I think coming from my background at Coca-Cola, reporting has always been important to me. I think there's some things I thought were fantastic and some things that I left behind from my past experience. But I
Sure.
do think like making decisions with data is very important. So internally, we have reports that we're looking at every week, specific to each retailer, specific to SKUs, specific to channels, etc. So I think reporting in general for us as an organization is very important. And then when I look at like our outside partners, we're meeting quarterly with our board where I'm presenting a more robust deck about our strategy and longer term plans and past performance. But I try to keep all of that information at the ready because I think it's
Yeah.
really important to run the business every day anyways.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I mean, just hearing all this and how much growth you guys have seen, it seems like that just is so much work and has to take so much time. How big is the team now? Is it still just the two of you?
No, so
Okay.
I started this year and it was just me full time, and then we'll finish this year with 6 full-time team members.
Oh, fantastic. That's exciting. There you go. That's some serious growth. Has that helped, or what have some of the challenges been of that's because that's something that's been interesting during my time at RX as we've gone through some different transitions. How has it been like thinking through, adding people to the business, and like how do you decide on when to add another headcount?
I feel like there's this nice mix, and I don't know that we have it down pat yet of, we're longer term planning. So I have a decent idea of like what I think the team will look like in 2021 and 2022. But, the business really dictates that. And so when we feel like we're like getting really stretched thin or almost to the breaking point, I think it's really important to bring someone on, when you maybe don't necessarily didn't need that person like yesterday, but before the team gets like stretched too thin. And
Sure.
so we've been really trying to balance that. And then, I think as we've brought on more people, my day has changed quite a bit. Like up until March of this year, I was still doing the fulfillment out of my apartment with like my husband and my nanny sometimes.
That's
And
so wild.
thankfully now we have a 3PL that does it. And I
Yeah.
spend time, thinking about the culture of the company and raising money and kind of the bigger strategic plan and innovation. Whereas like I'm so used to being so in the weeds. And so I'm just kind of learning as we go.
Got it. Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. What does for you guys like the next, I always like to ask this question, the 1, 3, 5 years look for Partake Foods right now?
Sure. So 1 year, that would put us in November 2021. I think we'll be at a couple thousand more doors. We'll have added some products that are not cookies, and we'll be really focused on kind of building the foundation of the company, making sure that we feel really solid that all of our employees are aligned with our mission, that we internally are kind of living that and breathing that mission every day, and that we're starting to dip our toe outside of cookies, but that our cookie business is really solid. When I look at 3 years, I hope that we have a couple of product lines that are in national distribution. And 5 years from now, I think a lot can happen in that time period. But my dream for Partake is that we make products that can sit in every aisle of the grocery store. I think it's really important. Like I look at brands like Kind and Chobani and even RX Bar that focused on a specific product and got that right and got the distribution right and made sure that the velocity was strong and they had their brand awareness before they spread themselves too thin. So I
Sure.
think
Yeah.
there is a really important balance there, but I hope that, our brand has the potential to make things that are not just cookies at some point.
Gotcha. And the thought of basically having the same ingredient makeup and the benefits in cookies across different aisles is what you're saying.
Definitely so. So I
Yeah.
think the things that will always ring true are the products need to taste good. They need to be made with ingredients you feel good about, and they need to be top eight allergen free and made in a top eight allergen free facility.
Got it. No, I love that. That's fantastic. How has kind of not off topic, but similar. I was curious. You guys have a really good e-commerce presence, and like I mentioned earlier, it's something I'm passionate about. How has e-commerce looked for you guys this year? Yes, a lot of companies are seeing growth. And then Prime Day. I was curious if you guys took part in Prime Day or had success on Prime Day.
So we're actually not on Amazon. So we
Oh,
did
you're not
not
on
take place.
Amazon.
We're not.
Okay.
We're not selling our product on Amazon. You might
Yeah,
find
I was
it
gonna
there,
say
but that
someone
is
else
not
probably
us
is then,
selling it.
right?
But we are very much focused on our website,
Yeah.
and we've had a banner year on ecom. So we actually redid our website recently
Yeah.
to make it more ecom friendly and to add subscriptions and loyalty programs and a lot of features that we didn't start the year with. And I think it can be a great tool for us to try out new innovation in a bit of a low risk way with the community that we know really likes our products already. And so I'm really bullish about growing our ecom business.
Yeah, I love that. Is there a reason you aren't on Amazon yet, or do you want to get on Amazon, or is that something you just want to focus on D2C for now and grow that?
Was actually kind of a blessing, and I don't want to call it a blessing in disguise, but we made a change with our Amazon account with their credit card, and we actually it created some sort of like security like breach, and so where we've been working hard to get back on Amazon, but
Oh,
we
okay.
haven't been able to find a real person to talk to. But I want to say it's a blessing in disguise because previously we focused all of our ecom efforts on Amazon and not as much as on our website, and we've really in not being on Amazon, seeing that like our website actually has a ton of opportunity and potential to grow and is quite a bit more profitable for us. So, when we figure out how to get back on Amazon, we'll probably have a few SKUs that are available there, but really focused on growing our ecom through our own website.
Got it. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. That Amazon's a tricky business. We've had all kinds of good and bad things happen to us on Amazon. So I can feel your pain there when it comes to that. But to your point, I mean, having your own D2C platform, it's like the closest thing you can get to your core consumers, right? Because you get so much information from them and can test so many different things. So, like I said, love your website. The website looks phenomenal. I
Thank
was on there
you.
earlier this morning again, and I was like, this is such a good website. Um, the one of the last questions I love to ask, and one that I think is really fun for listeners to understand is like, what do you think if you had to kind of boil everything down? What was one of the most important steps for you for Partake Foods from going from 0 to 1?
I think from going 0 to 1, it was some feedback that Seth Goldman from Honest Tea gave me while I was still working at Coca-Cola, which was very simple, but like so wise to just get started. I was so focused on, should we work with a distributor? Should we work with this distributor? What should we think about from an attributes perspective? And what should the packaging look like? And he was like, well, if you just get started and actually start selling the product to consumers, maybe they can be the guide and maybe your sales can be the guide in terms of telling you what's working and what's not working. And so I think so often people get caught up with like the idea of this like very fancy launch and like all of the headlines around building the team and fundraising that like at the end of the day, it's really important to just get started and it doesn't have to be fancy because where you start is not going to be where you end.
Love that. Love that. So just putting the hard work in and kind of getting it done. Got it.
Definitely.
No, I love that. Um, you know, being a CEO and a founder, I'm sure there's, like we've talked about a couple times, there's a million different things that are always on your to-do list and things to accomplish. And you're a mom and you've got, you know, all sorts of family stuff to take care of. Do you have any tools that you use for like tracking goals, daily tasks, you know, whether it's, you know, something as simple as notebook and paper, or you have apps? Or I like to always ask founders on here, like what do they use day to day to like kind of handle their life?
Sure. I'm not that tech savvy. I will say I keep it pretty simple with like my Google suite of like Google Docs and Google Sheets, and then a note in my iPhone that has my to-do list that I kind of cross-reference with my calendar. And that's it. I feel like I've been so heads down and busy that I'm probably missing out on tools that maybe would make my life easier, but I've been too lazy to learn any new ones. And kind of this has worked for me thus far. So I'm just going to stick with it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think actually the one common thing I've been hearing lately from most people is like the simpler the better. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people try to like overcomplicate it with apps or other things, but sometimes the simplest is the best.
I agree.
What would be your favorite book or like source of knowledge that you share out the most? That's like the other one that I love to ask founders on here.
Sure. I think it's really just dipping into the founder network. I think my 5-year-old made a joke the other day that I have like 20 books on my nightstand and I've just been so busy that I haven't had time to dig into them. And she's like, why don't you read any of these books? So I think I haven't read as much as I'd like recently, but I do make a point to talk to a lot of founders, whether it's people whose companies are much earlier stage and or people whose companies are much later stage. And then one thing that I made a point to do when I first started Partake was to talk to people whose companies hadn't worked out. I think whenever things are going really well, it's easy to simplify, just like, oh yeah, just go get into Target, just go
Yeah,
do this.
sure.
But when your company has not succeeded, and you poured like every last bit of like blood, sweat, and tears into it, you can really remember all the things that you wished you would have done or things you wish you would have done differently. And I feel like I learned so much more from the conversations with people whose companies hadn't done well than not to say than I have from people whose companies did do
Yeah.
well, but I think it was a really big source of knowledge for me.
Oh, that's really interesting. How did you even go about like how do you go about finding those types of people or companies?
I think some of it was it's just kind of like their social media. So I'd be following a brand on Instagram, and then I would realize like they'd stop posting, and I'd be like, oh, they may not exist anymore. And I would find the founder on LinkedIn, and I would just send them a quick note, like I was a big fan of your brand, and I just realized that maybe you guys aren't around anymore, and like, do you have some time to talk? And like, it's been amazing to me how welcoming the food and beverage community is, whether it's the huge founders, whether it's the founders whose companies haven't worked out. Like people are just so generous with their time and their information and their experiences.
Yeah, I would agree. I've most of the founders I've had on here have been in the food and beverage space, and it's been amazing. And thank you for giving some time. I know you, like you said, you've got a million things going on, so I appreciate you taking the time to come on here. I agree. I think the food and beverage space is probably one of the most like, I don't know, the camaraderie across food and beverage. Like everyone wants to help each other. Everyone realizes that like more than one person can win in a lot of ways. So I think that's really cool.
I agree.
Um, any advice for the listeners who want to start their own their own food or beverage companies that you would like to offer the listeners?
I don't, it's not rocket science. I think it's a little bit of luck and it's a lot of hard work, more hard work than I would have ever imagined in my life. But it can be done. Like, I'd never started a company before. I didn't have a lot of money. I didn't have access to a lot of money, and we were able to figure it out and grow. And so I think it's definitely possible if it's something that you want bad enough.
That makes sense. Yeah, it sounds like the hard work and just getting started is the key. Um, how can people find not only Partake Foods, but if you want to get a hold of you, do you want to give anyone like links, or I'll put links in the show notes, but would you like to, share out what the ways people can get involved with Partake Foods?
Sure thing. So we're across all social media channels at Partake Foods. And then if you want to find me, you can find me on Instagram at DG Woodard.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Denise, thank you so much. This was so fun. I appreciate it. I'm pumped. We're gonna go get some. Me and my wife hit up Target a lot, so we're gonna go check that out and try Partake Foods, the cookies. And it was a pleasure getting to know you a little more. And I wish you the best of luck with everything in the future.
Thank you so much, Shane. It was so nice to be on. I appreciate you sharing her story.
Absolutely. Good luck with everything, and we're excited to see what you do.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Denise.